more information on Copper Arrow, please contact U.S. Air Forces in Europe, Air Forces Africa Public Affairs. And last item here, on Friday, the Secretary and the Vice Chairman will travel to Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska, home of the United States Strategic Command Headquarters, to attend the change of command ceremony for U.S. Air Force General Anthony J. Cotton and U.S. Navy Admiral Charles A. Richard. And then on Saturday, which I'm sure you'll all be watching, the Secretary and the Chairman will travel to Philadelphia for the Army-Navy game, which I believe kickoff is at 15:10. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions. I'll go to Tara right here in the room.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
All right, I have a couple of vaccine questions. So first, DoD regularly deploys to countries that require a vaccine for entry. If the legislation passes ending DoD's mandate, what happens to those troops? Will they be kept at home, or is there any language in this bill that would require DoD to actually send them even if they're not vaccinated?
Well, that's a great question. And as you know, this legislation was just introduced late last night. So right now it is pending legislation. We don't comment on pending legislation. In terms of that specific query, again, that's a hypothetical. So I wouldn't be able to get into that just because we don't have final legislation.
Okay, a couple follow-ups.
Sure.
Is there concern in the building that if this bill does pass with with this wording, that DoD will be required to reinstate service members it has separated for refusing the vaccine?
So again, this is pending legislation introduced late last night. The Secretary over the weekend was very clear in his comments that he supports continuing and maintaining the vaccine mandate. He fully believes, this administration believes, that the vaccine has done incredible work in terms of saving lives of not just our service members, but people all across the country. And he believes that the health and readiness of our forces is a priority. So in terms of how we view the legislation, he has been continuously supportive of keeping the mandate in.
If the building still feels strongly about keeping the mandate in, are there DoD liaisons right now working with some of these members to try and convince them to change their mind and to keep the vaccine mandate?
Yeah, we have our legislative team that continues to work with members on the Hill, members of Congress in both chambers. That's part of their role and responsibility, is engaging with members on the Hill to make sure that they know where the Secretary's priorities are. And part of these regular conversations have been talking about the NDAA. But it's not just our team. I think the Secretary was pretty clear and forceful in his response over the weekend when he said that he supports continuing the vaccine mandate in the NDAA. Yeah, I'll come in the room. Hey.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Yeah.
I also have a vaccine mandate question.
Sure.
Yesterday, the Secretary said that he had no data that directly, I think that's his word, directly connects the vaccine mandate with recruiting.
Yeah.
But on Saturday, the Marine Commandant said that the vaccine mandate was affecting recruiting. He said specifically he thought it was disinformation about the vaccine in certain parts of the country. So does the Secretary disagree with the Commandant? Was there some nuance to his statement yesterday? And what is the reality? Is the vaccine mandate affecting military recruiting?
So I think what the Commandant was saying was disinformation specifically around the vaccine. He was not talking about the effectiveness of the vaccine, which we have seen be incredibly effective in keeping our service members safe. So I would ask that you put his comments into more holistically into what he was saying, which was specific about the vaccine. We have seen misinformation and disinformation out there on social media sites. And the reality is that we know the vaccine can save your life. Since the beginning of the pandemic, I believe there were 691 DoD personnel that have died from COVID, and that includes personnel, their family members, civilians, contractors. And since April, there have only been 2 deaths from COVID-19. So I think it is important to remember that I don't think they're at odds here, their statements. I think the Commandant was saying that there has been disinformation about the vaccine itself, but we know the vaccine can save your life, and that's why this building and the Secretary is supportive of maintaining the vaccine mandate.
With all due respect, I think the Commandant said clearly that the mandate was affecting recruiting.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't answer your question on recruitment.
Yeah, he gave the reason for it, but he's saying that it is affecting recruiting, and we had the Secretary say yesterday that he's seen no link with the mandate and recruiting issues. So which is correct?
Well, I think in terms of, I think what the Commandant was saying, and I would direct you to, of course, his office for further explanation, was that disinformation around the vaccine created confusion, which can, of course, lead to less people wanting to take it, which could lead to less people wanting to maybe enlist. But generally, and I think also just to put in context more, what the Secretary was asked about was what Kevin McCarthy was citing, which we have not seen the data that Kevin McCarthy cited on I think it was Fox, that he went on and said that the vaccine has impacted recruitment. Generally speaking, the vaccine mandate appears to have very minimal impact on recruiting, and we're continuing to look at what we can do to bring in talent, to bring in people all across the country into our services.
So that has minimal impact on recruiting?
Yes, that is what we have seen so far. Yeah, I'm going to go, I'll take Laura, and then I'm going to go to the phones and come back to the room.
Yeah, just to follow up on
Sure.
that, because that was going to be my exact question.
Well, he beat you to it.
You said very, very minimal impact, but that's not the same as no impact. And I believe what the Secretary said was we haven't seen any impact. So can you clarify that if I'm maybe missing something, and then can you quantify what is very minimal impact?
I cannot quantify what is very minimal impact. I mean, I think what we know is one of the largest impacts that we saw in recruitment was certainly the pandemic. Not being able to be out, not being able to talk about what the services are doing, not being able to travel, be engaged with people on the ground, that certainly had an impact on recruitment. And then not to mention economic factors. There's more competitiveness for jobs out there. Everyone is searching for talent. It's not just us that's having trouble in terms of bringing in good talent. There are companies out there that want great talent too, and we're competing against them. And that's just the reality that we have to remember is it's not just DOD in this vacuum looking for talent. There's a lot of other people also out there that we are competing against. So in terms of the vaccine mandate and in terms of the vaccine, we've seen very minimal impact on recruitment challenges. I think some of this goes back to what you were asking earlier, just on the disinformation and the confusion. Certainly early on, I was fortunate enough to be, sort of in some of the conversations about the vaccine and why it's important to take the vaccine. And, there was a lot of hesitancy. But we have to remember, too, that 99% of active duty personnel have at least one dose of the vaccine, and 98% of active duty are fully vaccinated. And that's a really important stat. I mean, we're talking about such a small percentage here that are not vaccinated. Did you have a follow-up, or can I go to the phones?
No, I think that's
okay. Great. I'm going to go to the phones. Yep. Idris, Reuters.
Hey, Sabrina. Two quick questions. Firstly, has Secretary Austin spoken with Kevin McCarthy directly about the COVID vaccine mandate and the impact repealing it would have? And has he spoken with President Biden since the legislation moved forward yesterday? And just more broadly, what impact, take aside the legislation which hasn't passed, what impact would a repealing of the COVID-19 vaccine mandate have on the military?
Okay. Hopefully I remember all your questions. So in terms of conversations with the president, I have nothing to read out. The secretary is in constant communication with the president and his team about all things, not just the COVID-19 vaccine or the NDAA, but other items as well. And so, I'll let those conversations remain private and have nothing to read out on that. In terms of, did the secretary speak to Congressman or Leader Kevin McCarthy this weekend? I think Kevin McCarthy said that they spoke this weekend, and so I will leave it at that in their conversation. But the secretary, his team, our legislative team is routinely engaged with the Hill, not just when it comes to the NDAA, but on other issues as well. So the conversations always remain fluid and open. In terms of, I'm sorry, your last question, can you repeat that for me?
Yeah, just legislation aside, what impact would repealing the COVID COVID-19 vaccine mandate have on the military? And can you just quickly describe, you said Biden and Austin are in constant communication. What is that, like once a day, twice a day? Can you give us sort of sense of that?
Well, I'm not going to characterize in terms of how many times they speak, but they remain in communication about a number of things, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's the NDAA or other items. I'm not going to get into more specifics than that. But in terms of what impact it would have on the force, I mean, the Secretary's priority that he's laid out from the very beginning is taking care of the health and well-being of our servicemen and women all across the country and the world are a top priority of his. And so we know the vaccine can inoculate you against getting COVID-19, or at least protect you if you do contract COVID-19. Your symptoms won't be nearly as bad. And so he fully supports maintaining the vaccine mandate. He believes that this is something that keeps our forces healthy, that keeps our forces safe. And again, I think you heard me at the top say that we had 691 deaths since the beginning of the pandemic. And then since April, we've only had 2. I think that shows pretty powerfully the impact that this vaccine can have in terms of saving lives. I'm going to go to another question on the phone, and then I'll come back in the room. Heather, USNI.
Hi, sorry to hit you with another vaccine question, but in terms of the troops that are unvaccinated, if they are reinstated, or the ones that have not been separated, are they considered deployable if they don't have this vaccine, even if there isn't a mandate that for them to get it anymore?
Right now, our policy hasn't changed. So right now, the mandate of the vaccine is still in place. Again, not going to comment on any pending legislation that could change anything one way or the other. And I'm just not going to get ahead of the congressional process as it plays out. Great, I'll come back in the room. Yeah, and then I'll come back, sorry.
Just to follow up on Idris's question.
Yeah.
So is it DOD's position that repealing the mandate would negatively impact the readiness of the force?
Certainly, I think what is important is what is important to the readiness of the force is getting the vaccine. So yes, it would impact the readiness of the force. You're more prone to getting COVID-19. Again, we've seen that the impacts of COVID, we had millions of people die here in this country because of either not having access to the vaccine or not taking the vaccine. And, we certainly know that the vaccine will save your life. Yeah. Hi, nice to see you.
Good to see you. The NDAA blocks the Pentagon from proceeding with plans to cancel certain programs and retire certain weapon systems, for instance. It requires DoD to maintain 31 amphibious ships, provide funding for a 3rd Arleigh Burke, beyond what the administration had sought. There's also prohibition on retiring the B-83 megaton gravity bomb, $25 million to continue the SLIC-MN. Both those weapons were opposed in the National Defense Strategy. So can you detail some of the impacts that maintaining those requirements would have?
Looks like you read all 4,000 pages last night. No, I'm not going to get into that any further. Again, this is pending legislation. Things we saw just yesterday, things were pulled out, added back into the bill. Not going to get ahead of that. I think the Secretary, you've heard the Chairman speak to this, we have the best, most capable war-fighting force there is on the earth, and we will maintain our readiness for whatever is needed.
Does does the Pentagon stand by its statement in the National Defense Strategy, and if Congress is going a different direction from what's outlined in that strategy, what happens?
Well, look, Congress, part of this democratic process is Congress working and figuring out what makes sense and what they can pass. We have been able to outline in our NDS what we believe makes sense. But again, this is not final legislation. Things could change at the last minute. We just don't know. And we're continuing to work through this. Barbara.
So you've made it really clear that the Secretary's best military advice is that the mandate should be maintained, that he's very clear on that. So what is his reaction then to the White House and the President raising the prospect of being agreeable to rescinding the mandate?
Well, the president agreed with the secretary and supports keeping the mandate, so I don't see a daylight there.
Isn't Secretary McCarthy suggesting he believes he has White House support for passing an NDAA with a mandate rescission?
Well, I have to correct you on it's Leader McCarthy, but I think, no, that's okay. That's okay.
My sincere apologies.
That's all right. Leader McCarthy did, I think, speak out about this. I think the White House issued a statement after his comments were made on Sunday. I would direct you to the White House for further comment on that. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll come back to you. Yes. Yeah. No, go ahead. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay,
You
okay,
go first.
right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Pat Tucker, Defense One. Good to see you.
Yeah.
So yesterday, 3 strikes within Russian territory, likely, according to a wide consensus among analysts, Ukrainian. 1 strike just 122 miles south east of Moscow, another one almost 500 miles in country. We know that the Ukrainian MOD and U.S. Defense Department coordinate a lot on operations on the ground. Was the Defense Department aware that those strikes were going to take place beforehand? Was that part of the coordination? And if not, is that the sort of thing, increased strikes deep within Russian territory, is that the sort of thing the Defense Department would like to be more aware of before they happen in the future?
Well, I wouldn't say that we are in constant communication or contact about strikes that are going to take place. We certainly work with our Ukrainian counterparts, but one of the things that we do is we're providing the weapons, the systems that they need. They are making the decisions on the ground in terms of targeting, in terms of when they conduct an operation. What we are providing is the security assistance. So no, we were not necessarily informed or aware of any strike happening within Russia. We've seen the reports, but I have nothing further to add to that. I would direct you to the Ukrainian military for further comment.
Okay. And then just a quick follow-up. The U.S. has been reluctant to give them ATACMS missiles that can range to Moscow out of fear of escalating the conflict. Now that they've shown that they're willing to basically range to Moscow, does that change at all the calculation or the discussion around providing them with longer range fires?
We're going to keep providing them what they need to protect their territory, to defend their citizens on the battlefield. I mean, part of what we are doing with our security assistance is making sure that they have what they need in this unprovoked fight or unprovoked war that Russia launched against Ukraine. And all we can do is ensure that they have the tools that they need. Of course, we don't want to see an escalation. That we're not looking for an escalation. We're not seeking a war with Russia. But we are going to enable Ukraine to protect itself.
Okay, so this doesn't really change the calculus at all, the fact that they're now striking deep within Russian territory?
I have no reason to believe that. In terms of calculus, I mean, again, security assistance packages, they're going to continue to come. Congress, we're going to continue to work with Congress to request more funding for when we need it, and presidential drawdown authorities are going to be continued to be used. So that I expect to continue pretty regularly. Sorry, yes. I didn't mean to confuse everyone there.
Not a problem. Is there any plan to require a COVID booster shot? And if not, why? Is there a consensus inside of the department that it's not medically needed?
Well, I don't have any, our policy hasn't changed. I mean, part of it is, the vaccine mandate and the whatever.
But there's no booster requirement, correct?
I would have to just check our policy. I don't believe so. I think it's just the 2 shots, and maybe, there might be further guidance coming out from the CDC later, but I'm not aware of the booster being part of that, as far as I know. But let me just to make sure, let me just take that question and get back to you on that. Yeah, I'm going to come back to you. I'm just going to go. Yes, over here. Hey, Rio. Hi.
Yesterday, the secretary said after the meeting with Australian counterparts, the U.S. and Australia agreed to invite Japan to integrate into our post posture initiatives in Australia. So could you tell us a little bit more about the specifics on what the U.S. and Australia agreed to do with Japan in Australia?
And I think part of your question was asking also what Australia and Japan are doing together, which I would direct you to their governments for further comment. Part of what you saw yesterday was increasing cooperation and trilateral engagement in the region, and that, of course, includes one of our longest allies, Japan. And so we Australia and I believe Japan are going to have a 2+2 meeting in Tokyo soon. And when they have that, maybe we'll have more to share with you on that, but we just look forward to continuing to build on that cooperation. And I mean, today, I know you didn't ask, it's not specific to Australia, but the exercise that I announced today is taking place in Japan, just furthering our bilateral relationship there. Yeah, of course. Yes, in the back. Oh, and then, sorry, Tara, I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This from Asahi News. Thank you. So it's follow-up to Leo's questions. So that Secretary Austin's remark that they will invite Japan to integrate into U.S. force posture initiative. So it doesn't mean inviting Japan to rotational presence in Australia necessarily.
Are you talking about expanded force posture? Is that what you're...
So it's about the same Secretary Austin's remark.
What he
So he
mentioned
said,
yesterday?
yeah, he will invite Japan to integrate into the force posture initiative. So is it more about inviting Japan to more joint exercises, or is it about Japan's participation in rotational presence in Australia?
So this is about building on the trilateral relationship that exists between Australia and Japan. As part of, I think, what you're referring to, that the Secretary spoke to yesterday at the State Department, was that the U.S. will increase its rotational presence in capabilities in Australia across air, land, and maritime domains. But I think next year's rotation will build on the rotations that the department has already carried out this year in Australia. Yeah.
Just a follow-up on that, Chinese foreign ministry responded to the Secretary Austin's remarks yesterday, saying that the U.S. is going to increase its footprint, rotational footprint in Australia. Chinese foreign ministry says the United States keeps creating small circles of with some of its allies. Such actions will only undermine regional peace and stability. What's your reaction to that?
I don't think exercises with other countries, like whether, I mean, I don't know if he mentioned any specifics, but we conduct bilateral, trilateral exercises all the time with other countries, as does China. I certainly don't think we are undermining the security in any way. As we laid out in the NDS, we see China as our pacing challenge here, but we're not looking to seek conflict with China. We're seeking competition. And we can do that strategically, we can do that safely, and we can do that with our partners and allies in the region and all around the world. Yeah, go ahead. Follow up, yeah.
Like Secretary Austin was talking about rotational forces. Are we talking about they are going to be there just for exercises, or when we say rotational, we mean that they will be there for a period of time?
Well, to the Secretary's comments, I mean, I have nothing further to add. Rotational would mean that they continue to rotate, but we have a presence, an enduring presence in the region. So is there something more specific that you're asking, or?
Secretary Austin specifically said that the United States is going to increase its rotational forces in Australia.
Yep, and that's what I just...
Exercises, or are we talking about rotational forces like currently we have in Poland, in Eastern Europe, or in Middle East?
No, as part of our expanded force posture there, which what he was force posture cooperation there, he was talking about just increasing the rotational presence of U.S. capabilities in Australia. That doesn't preclude that we wouldn't be able to build on more exercises there per se, but right now it's just that, just increasing our rotational presence. I'm just going to go to the phones, and then I'll come back to the room right here. Courtney Kuby.
Hi. So what I'm wondering is on the idea of people signing up or not because of the COVID vaccine. DoD does these surveys where they ask about propensity to serve and ability and willingness and whether people are actually eligible to serve. And I'm wondering if any of those have ever actually asked the question whether people are not going to sign up or enlist or because of the COVID vaccine. Because I found it interesting that yesterday Secretary Austin specifically said they have no hard data. There's clearly anecdotal evidence that people are unhappy with the vaccine mandate. All you have to do is look at social media and media reports. So what I'm curious is, has DoD actually ever asked if people are not signing up because of the COVID vaccine?
I would have to take that question, Courtney. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that in terms of if it's been asked on a particular survey, either in a service or department-wide.
And then just one follow-up. I wonder if I know that the legislation isn't signed yet. The president hasn't signed it yet, but I'm wondering if you can tell us even generally, if Secretary Austin or General Milley or the chiefs or anyone are doing any kind of outreach to try to change this, to try to, I don't know what that would look like, frankly, because if the language is already out there, but if there's any sort of last ditch efforts to try to change this repeal, or if everyone has pretty much accepted the fact that this is where it's going.
Well, I think in terms of outreach, yes. I mean, he's been very outspoken when what he said on Sunday, which he supports continuing or maintaining the vaccine mandate. I think that's a pretty clear message to members of Congress who are about to go through and vote on the NDAA. I think that is a clear point of outreach to the Hill and pretty direct on where he stands and his position. I'm going to take one more from the phones and then I'll come back in the room. Sang-Min Lee, Radio Free Asia.
Yes, Jake Sullivan, the White House National Security Advisor, warned China last month that if North Korea keep going down this road, which may continue to make a provocation, it will simply mean further enhanced American military and security presence in the region. After that, North Korea continued to make a provocation, including launching new ICBM. So my question is that now, are you considering the further enhanced American military presence in East Asia to pressure China to use their influence on North Korea?
I think the Secretary spoke to this. We would certainly welcome China engaging with the DPRK to reduce tensions every time the DPRK launches a new missile or conducts any type of test that further destabilizes the region. That's not something we want to see. We are committed to the full denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and so we would welcome China engaging with North Korea on this issue. Great. I'm going to come back in the room. I'm going to come here and then I'll come over here. Yeah.
Thank you. On the Ukrainian drone strikes in Russia, can you rule out that those are U.S. weapons being used?
I would say that I wouldn't be able to speak to that. I would refer you to the Ukrainians to speak to anything about any of their operations. Yeah, great. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a clarifier on Heather's question. So
sure.
Under the current policy right now, current policy, not the legislation,
yeah.
If a service member is not vaccinated and say they're going through the religious exemptions process, can they be deployed or are they considered non-deployable?
I believe they're considered non-deployable because they do not fall under the department's, the current policy, which is the vaccine mandate.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Yes, you had a question in the back. Yeah.
Thank you. Lithuania's been a member of NATO since 2004, and the Prime Minister today was at the White House, met with Vice President Harris. Vice President Harris, in the reports that came out, reassured Lithuania that the U.S. will stand with them. Is there any thought about troop changes or U.S. presence within the NATO contingency forces there to bolster that area?
No, nothing to announce today. If anything changes, I'll certainly let you know. Thank you. Great. I'll take two more and then I gotta wrap. Yeah.
John Kirby, your predecessor, said the Republicans in Congress have obviously decided they'd rather fight against the health and well-being of those troops rather than protecting them. Does the Pentagon feel the same way?
Well, I think the repeal of the vaccine mandate is coming from...
It's a Republican issue. It's a partisan issue, which is what he seems to be saying.
Well, I would let Mr. Kirby's words stand for themselves. He certainly had this podium before me. We'll just direct you back to him. But I think our words have been very clear from here. We certainly have seen that the vaccine works. It will save your life. We have unfortunately seen this has become a partisan issue, which is unfortunate because it shouldn't be. And so I will just, say that I think the Secretary continues to support upholding the COVID-19 vaccine mandate, and we hope that is included in the NDA. Great. Yes, and one last question back here.
Okay, thank you for taking my question.
Yeah.
So my question is about arms stockpile, and I know you have been asked about this many times before, but there are more reports about that suggesting that U.S. is running low on some weapons and ammunition to transfer to Ukraine. So can you talk a little bit about the level of stockpile, and is there any serious concern? And I was wondering if it affects U.S. readiness in other regions such as East Asia.
And you said, I'm sorry, the last question was readiness on?
In other
East Asia.
regions such as East Asia.
Thank you. In terms of our stockpiles, the Secretary, the Chairman have been very clear that with every security assistance package that we put together and package for Ukraine, we're always assessing our readiness. We are not going to drop below certain levels. We're going to maintain a level of our own readiness where we feel comfortable, where we feel secure, and that will include, our stockpiles as well. I think what you're getting to in terms of readiness in East Asia, again, we feel confident that we are able to continue to supply Ukraine with the security assistance it needs, while remaining focused on other areas in the Indo-Pacific, and certainly remaining focused on China, which has certainly been extensively laid out on why we are so focused on China in the National Defense Strategy. And I'd point you to that. Thanks all. I have to hop to a meeting, but thank you. Happy Wednesday. We'll see you later this week or next week.